Again, hello, my name's Lindsay Pruitt. I'm the delivery lead from Equal Experts. I'm going to be the host for today's session. We're really excited and very grateful to having Brigid McBride, Deborah Carney, and Jane from Ofsted joining us today to talk about digital transformation. Brigid is a veteran of digital transformations, having been previously at HMRC Digital for many years. And I had great fun and pleasure working with Brigid. Really enjoyed her friendly approach and a clear, assertive leadership. Before Ofsted, Deborah was at the Passport Office, part of the Home Office, which has undergone a really successful digital transformation over the last few years. And if you've recently applied for a renewal of your passport, you'll have used their fantastic digital service. So in today's talk, Brigid and Deborah will be talking about the delivery of Ofsted's digital strategy, and they'll be joined at the end by Jane Tyson for a Q&A discussion. For the Q&A part, we're going to be using Zoom's Q&A function. So feel free to start adding questions using the Q&A tab at any point during the talk. We'll be answering the questions order which have been top voted. So look at what questions other people are adding and then vote for those you'd like to see covered. So I will hand over to Brigid. So take it away, Brigid.
Yeah, thanks very much, Lindsay. And Deborah and I will take around sort of 20 to 30 minutes to go through our presentation and share, and then get to the thoughts from that. So I'll just start with a little bit around where we started in this journey in Ofsted, and that's kind of like selfishly I'll talk about when I first came and joined the organisation, which was 3 years ago. And in that kind of introduction, some of you may have joined a bit later, we talked about the kind of organisation, but I think it's worth just talking through some of the stuff about our workforce. So the workforce is primarily in inspection and regulation. More than half of our workforce actually work from home. So they're permanent home workers. They join together in teams to go and do inspections. So they come together to collaborate from their home to go in or to do regulatory visits, etc. So we've got that kind of workforce that's out there working in that. We've also got a really big cadre of specialists in research and data, statisticians, because a big part of our work is not only identifying risk in various settings, whether they're children's homes, education, etc., but also spotting those themes, what's happening in education, things like knife crime that you might hear about, or the more recently, the sort of sexual exploitation, etc., sexual harassment in schools. We're looking for those themes and reporting on them and responding to those. So we've got quite a diverse workforce. And in terms of customers, they range from some services that are really high volume and informational, parents that are looking to see how well schools are doing before they make choices around which schools they'll go to, or people looking for information around fostering, etc., etc., etc. So very large volumes of informational content, but then probably lower volume in terms of government departments in terms of transactional, but very highly complex processes because of the safeguarding issues and the kind of information that we gather from customers. So diverse workforce and quite a big range of customer and customer support. So a very simple vision when we came in and started was to make it easier for our customers. So, modernising our systems just in line with other organisations and really getting that strong customer heartbeat into the organisation. But also equipping our people and supporting that distributed workforce. So our paperless campaign was less about taking paper out of the customer channels, but more about taking paper out of our workforce. So we rolled out tools that would allow those groups of inspectors, as they went out into inspection, to collaborate in real time with digital tools to share insight and themes as they're going, and then just supporting that our workforce with modern devices and responsive support. Now, it was really important that we kind of sold this to the organisation, asking for a really big investment in digital and the transformation for Ofsted. And that included making the case for moving from a largely outsourced model to an in-sourced model and building that capability. So we were asking for quite a lot of money to make these changes. And Deborah will later talk about how we're replacing our legacy applications. So one of the things was just to create that really strong vision and to deliver some early value. And that early value was through some of our customer channels, and as I've said, the collaboration tools that we rolled out for our inspectors. So first thing after getting that investment was to start building that workforce that would enable us to really support the transformation. And this is big and tricky because most of our previously we'd managed change in an outsourced model, had really good people in the organisation with that vision for how to do change, but the way that it was leveraged was through commercial contracts and managing commercial relationships rather than kind of managing technologists ourselves and hands-on managing the change. So the model that I've put up on the screen is probably quite familiar, particularly if you work in government in the UK. But it was a functional model, matrix managed and closely aligned to civil service thinking on current frameworks and functions, and closely aligned to the digital and data and technology framework and roles. So we understood that you know, we would be successful in terms of our recruitment and retention if we were really aligned to those career paths. There is private sector and public sector moves through, but it is in roles that people understand. And then we've got heads that lead on these. So colleague services with our service and product function, but they primarily deliver tools for the internal workforce. So you can get a very strong relationship management model on there. And our customer services are service and product people that deliver products out for our external customers, and again those relationships with external stakeholders as well as those that care about customer service in the organisation. Our design function brings together user researchers, content designers, plus our architecture function, both the technical architecture and solutions architecture and our principal architecture function. So that kind of understands that really close relationship between meeting those user needs through that research and the way that we manage our state and make those choices. We also have kind of service design and content design in that function that then support some of our product teams, etc., as we manage change through. And Deborah leads on our portfolio and program delivery function. That's very closely aligned to the project profession in government. And again, we've moved primarily from delivering big programs of change to a portfolio approach with smaller projects, and then other familiar kind of functions, our develop, test and operate, the people that kind of build, make sure that they test before we go into live, and then operate live our new services. And that's the area that Jane works in, and Jane works in our infrastructure as we move our services over to the cloud. And then information and security function around making sure that we've got someone that we're going to that's keeping us all honest and making sure that we're meeting those standards. And finally, I've talked about a really big data function in Ofsted. We have more than 100 people in this function, and they are a mixture of data scientists and data engineers, but also our statistical function. So with that alignment to that government profession. So if you think around the Office for National Statistics, etc. So healthy mix of existing and new recruits, and that was really important to us when we started this journey, that some of our workforce, you know, as we moved over, that we had a transition from people that were working in sort of similar roles, but into, for example, new product roles, or wanted to start at a junior level in user research and build up their experience. So we've kind of managed to do that, but we still have a reliance on contingent labour externally, and we will continue to do that for that flexibility that it brings us, and because some of the roles that remain quite difficult to fill, and we're in that competition in the industry to get the best people in at all times. So I'll pause there and then hand over to Deborah, who'll talk about how we took this model, then started approaching replacing our legacy.
Yeah, so I joined Ofsted in December 2019, and initially was asked to kind of work with one of our big programs of work, actually around our contacts program, developing a single customer view platform, kind of a customer data model effectively, and establishing our automation delivery center. But coupled with that was really to kind of start thinking about the portfolio. We had a portfolio established, so it was around kind of how we can further progress that portfolio and what we need to do to kind of develop and mature it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about portfolio management in a minute. But what became, as we started kind of looking at the roadmap and what we were thinking about doing in what we need to deliver in 2020, 2021, and then obviously we had the COVID-19 pandemic, it became kind of very obvious we need to start thinking about one of big items on our roadmap, which was around replacing our core system. So we've got a that supports all of our Ofsted's regulatory and inspection work, which includes our kind of core workflow, business intelligence, performance management, but it also holds a large amount of Ofsted's operational data. And like kind of a similar story, I guess, in a lot of government departments, the contract was kind of is up for renewal in the next couple of years. So we had to think about what we were going to do so we started doing a bit of kind of with some user research and analysis, and just really kind of working through some of those problem statements. You know, what are the things that we want to address when we replace. And one of the things that kind of came out was that actually it's not just that there are large amounts of operations that occur outside in order to support the business process. So things like HR data, registration providers, evidence gathering, authentication, and MI and reporting. And there's lots of variation in processes in some of the areas, kind of you know, around kind of quality assurance, that type of thing, that change the user journey and activities for our groups of users. So it wasn't ideal. So our journey at the moment isn't ideal, and isn't especially intuitive. It's an off-the-shelf product, like most of our legacy systems that have been heavily bespoke to kind of meet our kind of user needs. So it's not necessarily intuitive, and you have to have a lot of knowledge and experience really to know where to go, and what that kind of incorporates a kind of a lot of difference in terms of process and how people use the systems. And from an architectural perspective, relatively monolithic, so kind of everything seems to kind of focus around got a big data store, and it's not kind of the easiest of systems to change, and it is quite costly. So when we want to make a change, a relatively small change, we need to them and lots of other systems. So we looked at what the best thing to do would be, and we kind of concluded that it'd be really difficult to achieve our spending objectives and meet the needs of the business by purchasing, building and developing a straight replacement. So we looked at kind of what our other options were, and we kind of concluded that looking at this kind of as a kind of holistically across the estate, so application and data modernisation was kind of the title we've kind of given all of this. We're taking a function by function approach, we called our modular approach, to help us release the benefits quickly and enable us to be flexible and responsive to the changes, the financial changes, the policy changes, and the priority changes that can be caused by all sorts of things. And obviously at the time it was quite kind of topical, and still is kind of around COVID-19. We really had to kind of think about kind of what we was delivering and how we were delivering things at certainly this time last year, and had to kind of change some of our priorities quite quickly. So we needed to be very flexible and responsive. So we kind of thought about this as a modular approach, and when we thought about splitting it into the 4 modules, and you can see those on the screen, and instead of bringing this together as one single business case for kind of a huge transformation, because it was all kind of wrapped together, it really would look like that. We've kind of taken an individual case approach, and we're developing an individual case for each of the blocks, but we obviously are managing those dependencies across those modules very, very closely. So just a little bit more around the modules. So the areas that we kind of split this into is the inspection and regulation service, the working with customers, the data foundations, and then our kind of business intelligence and our operational and reporting. So on the inspection and regulation service, so this is about developing tools for our inspection and regulatory teams. So that's both the inspectors and regulatory inspectors, and those teams that support those teams. So our planners and our support staff. So it's developing those services for them. And we started with what we called our Pathfinder project, and that was an alternative inspection management system for a new framework actually that we're starting in the next few weeks on May the 4th, so initial teacher education. And it's a relatively small remit in the scheme of things in Ofsted. So in terms of kind of number of inspections, it's a very, very small proportion of what we would do for some of the bigger transactional remits like schools and further education and skills and colleges. We thought it'd be a good kind of opportunity to give this kind of user focus, aligning to kind of government GDS standards, developing decoupled systems. We thought it'd be a good kind of test bed really for us to really kind of enable us to explore some of the challenges, the technical challenges, but also start getting our users and our business teams kind of used to this approach. Because in the past, they've been very much used to us going and buying something and then spending kind of years actually working with the teams to bespoke it and develop it, big kind of requirements elaboration phases, and then kind of big kind of waterfall type projects. So kind of doing this iteratively, taking a user-centered design approach is quite new for Ofsted, and using kind of agile kind of methods and techniques. So we thought this would be a good one to trial, and we have kind of been working very closely with our IT team. We have now, in a very, very short time actually, only in 6 months, developed a product for them that kind of that does address more than minimum viable product actually, kind of the pre, in and post kind of inspection services for that team. And we're now kind of thinking about how we kind of move on to some of those bigger remits, and we're looking now at going actually into schools, which is our kind of biggest in terms of transactions, but very kind of similar and quite closely aligned to ITE, working to kind of build out that schools kind of inspection journey. So that's our inspection and regulation services. Working with customers, the next module, this is about developing digital tools and services to allow our colleagues to deliver colleagues that interact directly with customers. So a lot of our complaints and feedback teams, our contact center staff. So developing digital tools and services for those areas. And what we found when we kind of started talking to those teams and looking at the journeys and the systems that they're using, this is kind of where we're going to get the most value in terms of decommissioning legacy systems, because there's lots of different systems that they're all using, and actually quite a bit of manual process to link and join some of these systems together. So that's our kind of working with customers module. And then our data foundations module, this is about taking the data aspect, which I say is predominantly in Signum, but we've also got data in lots of our other systems, and developing one source of the truth. And what we're thinking, what we're doing in terms of this is kind of splitting this into 3 areas and thinking about how we manage our data, so that kind of data governance, how we store our data, so developing some kind of developing a common data layer, so some kind of big data, some kind of data store, and then how we share our data, so a messaging layer, so how we communicate and share data with both internal and external customers. And then the 4th module is a bit of a kind of a catch-all module really around reporting, but as Brigid said, we've got a big kind of area. One of our objectives, Ofsted's objectives, is around research and thematics, research and evaluation. So some of this will be kind of wrapped up in some of the inspection and regulation service, working with customer and data foundations, so reporting and business intelligence will be thought about through those modules. So it won't exclusively be picked up in this space, but we're making sure we can linking all of that together, and we've got that, we haven't missed anything in terms of reporting. So that was our proposal in terms of how we kind of manage this quite big piece of change for Ofsted, and in a very different and new way. So we when thinking about that, we then thought about, okay, what we're going to do in terms of governance. So historically in Ofsted, we will stand up a programme board, have governance wrapped around that specific thing. And actually, we've already got quite a lot of governance in Ofsted. We've got quite a mature approval process. And when I joined back in December 2019, it's one of the things we looked at was how we can just kind of shore up some of that approval process and make sure we had all of kind of the layers, is focus on all of the layers. So how do we get things onto our portfolio? How do we get decisions? How do we manage those dependencies? So actually, when we looked at it, we had all of those in place in the main already. So the only additional thing we decided to do was actually include a working group, so that we could just manage that delivery and those dependencies. So we've got an SRO for our portfolio, DSAP portfolio. That's our Chief Operating Officer, and Matthew has taken on the lead of the SRO ship for application and data modernisation. The areas have been, the modules are such that actually they fit quite nicely with some of our functional and business areas already. So we have directors, as we mentioned at the start, for those of you that joined for our initial conversation around education and social care. So we've got the business sponsors for the education side, so the inspection services, and the business sponsor for the regulation services kind of would fit quite nicely with those director roles. And we've also got a director for HR and operations, Karen, who is responsible for all of the kind of the customer teams. So we already kind of aligned quite nicely to our current kind of structure within Ofsted. So we decided to kind of leverage those, so that there was, we weren't adding kind of big change to how we govern things. And of course, taking on those agile kind of practices, we agree that we'll do kind of show and tells, the retrospectives, and kind of manage things using those ceremonies that we're used to doing kind of in that agile kind of space, and start bringing our stakeholders into that and start kind of getting them used to our language. Brigid, can we move on to the next slide, please? Yeah, so I've talked a little bit about portfolio management and how kind of all of this fits into the portfolio. So we've taken on quite a big kind of piece of work kind of with application and data modernisation. That doesn't kind of stop all the additional kind of the other initiatives and changes and framework changes that we have kind of as business as usual. And then we do have a large volume of policy-driven changes that we do need to support and continue delivering for kind of through the year and through the years as we're delivering this application and data modernisation programme. So we've kind of put that into the, as I said, we've looked at it in terms of a portfolio approach. So we thought about how do we get things onto the portfolio in a managed and controlled way? How do we prioritise? So we've developed this, what we call our digital front door, which is our portfolio triage group. So it's kind of set on the right-hand side of the diagram. It's kind of second on the list. We've got some criteria. So those of you familiar with portfolio management, it's kind of your usual criteria. So how does it align to the strategy and the objectives of the organisation? What are the benefits? What's the complexity? Have we done this type of thing before? And eventually you kind of, and what's the size? So to get that kind of scoring type process, we get a score for the project or the initiative. And then we look at the Moscow. So we take the must, should, could approach and look at where that fits in. And we've got 60 plus items on our, and changes and projects on our list. And we've kind of ranked everything. We've introduced a resourcing group. So on a monthly basis, we kind of bring in all new projects through the triage group. We then have our resourcing group where we look at where we can, whether we can resource the items that have come through the triage group, or whether some of the projects that are currently on the pipeline need more resourcing, both financial and people. And then we take those decisions through our digital portfolio board. And we make the decisions around. So we ask the portfolio board. We could put recommendations portfolio board to make those decisions. So I think, Brigid, that's probably it in terms of portfolio management.
Yeah, thanks. So I think Lindsay, we're ready to take some questions to
Great.
see, get the conversation going.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. Well, thanks, folks, for the questions. If you've got further questions, please add them in through the Q&A. And have a look at questions that are there already and start voting up the ones that you'd like to see answered first. And the first question that we've got is from Matt Ford. Hey, Matt, thanks for asking your question. I'll start it, so I'll finish. Mia's question has gone up top. So Matt Ford's question was, how have the existing staff taken to the new disciplines like user research?
I mean, I'll start and Deborah come in with that. So it hasn't been easy. Yeah, it's always a journey that you go on, and people are slightly worried when you go through it. I think what we did really well at the beginning was that model that I've put up. We had an extensive consultation with the existing staff. I mean, we actually took the time to just say, look, we're not going to do anything for a couple of months. Let's all just discuss this. Let's feed into your views on where we put things, how people work. And we also, and we could afford to do it, we're a big enough organisation to do that, although we're not huge, was we gave a commitment that we wouldn't compulsorily move people from one place to the other. It would all be on a voluntary basis. Now, that made it a bit hard from a leadership perspective, but it made it slightly easier from, taking people with you. I think, and what we wanted to do was not just have an organisation that was populated by new shiny people that didn't have the existing workforce feeling that they had a stake in it. So that was really at the heart of it. So we did have to learn how to do this stuff, though. So we did have to bring in some really good experts that had the experience of doing it, so the existing workforce could learn. So part of that was getting the leadership in first, and then going from it. I think we've had some really great examples of people that have moved over, one or two into user research, but also into product. But we've also had to work quite closely. I think product in particular is a new skill. You can't take people that have worked in business analysis and requirements and just drop them in without that support. So we've had to sort of strengthen our communities of practice, bring people that are working in the same profession together to learn from each other, but actually make those kind of key appointments so that there's some support. I don't know whether, Deborah, you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think just in terms of how the stakeholders have responded, and I think from that angle, they've really positively, actually. I mean, we do get lots of support from the business, and they're really keen to be involved in user research, user acceptance testing, model office. They're very kind of engaged. Actually, it's been I say easy, but it's been certainly been receptive to it, and we've been able to. We've obviously have to kind of think about the scheduling in the time, but we've, you know, with the portfolio management, we can kind of couple that together.
Great. Okay, thank you both for that. Let's now go on to the next question, which was from Mia. One second, if I can just scroll up to the top of the list. So Mia's question was on getting feedback. So sorry, how have you measured success of the transformation for both systems and internal users? It's one important aspect of the GDS approach is doing things based around user need and understanding the impact. So what can you tell us about that?
So yeah, so there's a variety, you know, just the standard stuff. We use customer satisfaction, you know, on our external facing services and our internal services. And one of the things that I was really keen on doing when I came in, and because I was new in, I think I could embed it, was actually saying if we care enough about our external services that we put GDS assessments on them. For our own workforce, we should do the same. So we have that principle that we run GDS assessments on internal services as well as external. We have the concept of customer satisfaction on our internal services as well as our external. We have, it's not on all of them, but you know, as we develop them and bring new ones in, we have that kind of concept. And in terms of kind of progress, in terms of change progress, well, there's, you know, there's the classic, how much have we got new and old, and the Harvey balls in terms of being able to do that. We have been able to already decommission our old registration services as an example. And then finally, we haven't quite got it in yet, but will be critical for our working with customers module is just to have that transaction model that measures the cost per transaction across the, and then we can show that fluctuations as we invest in those. So that isn't quite at the maturity that we would want it to be at, but we've kind of got that concept in that's the next phase. And that moving, we haven't talked a lot about kind of investment and financing in this presentation, but part of that was actually to get this concept of we've got build, you know, capex, you know, the normal investment, but we've got this improve, and we've got this bucket of money which we manage through our service and product people, and actually their backlogs, you know, and we use that kind of that bucket to kind of make those improvements on those backlogs in products. Yeah. And Deborah, anything else?
I think you've covered it all there, Brigid. The only thing I was thinking of, not quantitative, but the qualitative side of things, kind of through our governance, actually. So through the boards that we've got in place, we do ask for feedback. We do kind of the normal kind of closures and you know, put in the governance and the controls. So we get feedback that way. We do the retros and lessons learned and all of those. So yeah.
Great, thank you. That's great. It's particularly great to hear that you're applying the GDS approach to internal services as well. They're just as important. I'm sure your colleagues really appreciate that. Okay, let's move on to a question from Stuart Chadwick. He's very appreciative of your talk. He wants to know, did you find that the governance model hindered your ability to make decisions quickly? And if so, did you manage to find a way to decentralize the decision-making process effectively?
Yeah, I mean, it's always the thing, you need an A level in governance, don't you? Yeah. How do you get that? How do you get that kind of balance of pace and control? So I think the thing that's helped us is this concept of improved funding. So we went and laid out our stall, you know, back a year ago, Deborah and I, and we talked about a 3-year DDAT roadmap around how we were going to transform the organisation. And out of that, there were 3 buckets of money. Yeah. So there was run money, which is just keeping everything going, paying for the workforce, etc., which is just baked into your kind of bottom line, and you're just kind of like managing over it, the edges year on year, up and down a bit. We then also got this improved money, which was to say we've built some of the digital platforms, we're not complete, but you've made these investments, give us a bunch of money to keep improving those, and we'll just kind of manage those through some quite light touch governance to ensure that we're meeting stakeholder needs. So the investment pot is not the whole pot. Now we go on that investment pot, which is the money for doing some of the big transformative building blocks and that replacement. And what we're doing is going, twice a year on the roadmap to say, this is how it's changed, this is any kind of movement between the modules. But because we broke the modules off from a big program, we're going separately with kind of like data. This is the, so they're free to go on their own track. We're not having to do big complex cases. And we found that kind of works for us in terms of having the agility that we need, but actually the confidence of an exec team that really care about education and social care, don't really care about some of this stuff, and it makes their heads hurt. But that they've got some control over what sometimes feel like telephone number figures when we're asking for millions, they can kind of see and chunk that up. So I think the big thing for me was that run, improve, build, and just doing the build as a separate thing through that investment board and then chunking it up into modules. But Deborah, you're at the cutting edge of this, with all the treasury and all those other approvals. Yeah,
I think that's right, and I think it's kind of taking that iterative approach in terms of kind of going the governance and going for what we're asking for, and keeping it at the right level. So we kind of, our ask is fairly high level, but we build on the story every time we go back. We try and be consistent in how we present it, and we build on. So we tell them what we've, it's just kind of normal stuff. We tell them what we told them we told them last time, or we agreed last time. We just build on it, and then actually I think kind of it's helped by there is quite a lot of autonomy within the operational teams in terms of how we do things. So long as we get that right, and it's taken us a little bit to get there, but I think we in terms of, as long as we get that engagement right with the delivery teams, which we are doing, we can make those quite quick decisions on the ground in terms of what impacts the product and how we develop and take the product forwards. But those big kind of service questions we take to board, but we keep it fairly high level, but we work really closely with the teams, really closely. So and we impact assess things as we go along in the way you would, and we get those agreements quite quickly.
Great, thank you very much. Jane, do you want to add anything to this, or?
Yeah, Jane. Yeah, sorry, Jane. I keep.
No, I think you both covered covered everything really well.
Great, cool. Okay, let's move on to next highest voted question, which is another one by Matt Ford. To what extent have you been able to empower teams to develop product or service roadmaps based on user data or feedback? So how much of this change is being driven by yourselves from the top down, or versus how much is coming from the teams themselves? And perhaps could you say a bit more about how many teams you have working within Ofsted on your digital strategy?
Yeah, I'll start with kind of the numbers of teams. So it's broadly, we've got a kind of like a kind of hierarchical model in service and product, which is like one head, at the top, head of customer and head of colleagues, which would have 3 senior product managers underneath them, who would each of them have 3 product managers underneath them. So you get kind of like 10 teams in customer and 10 teams in colleagues. Now, sometimes those teams are quite small because they're they're kind of just doing some improvement on an existing service, or they're at the very early stages of looking at a product. And sometimes they're big because they're doing something like inspection services or the big data layer. So broadly, that's kind of the numbers that we've got. And then then the kind of product people will pull together user researchers when they need them, content designers, delivery managers, etc., etc. But if you start from that kind of hierarchy, that's the kind of shape. What we've found is the emphasis now, having the first 2 years of my time in Ofsted looking at customer stuff and doing quite a lot on there, because of apps and data modernisation, we're moving a lot of our resource over to the internal colleague stuff. They're staying in their teams and because they're heads, because it gives that flexibility. But we're moving them around. And then, sorry, the last bit of that question, I've forgotten it because I'm talking about the numbers. Yeah.
See, or was it the autonomy over the
Yeah.
product? And
well, do you want to take that one, Deborah? Yeah.
Do you know, I think quite a bit. So taking kind of, I guess, our aims for our initial teacher education, which we're just kind of coming to the deployment phase, deployment date. The team, they have developed the product, so and they've had autonomy to develop the product. We you know, the only thing I guess we ask is that we don't replicate. But of course, it's our first one, so there are some elements of that where we're going to have to kind of take that tech debt and think about how we kind of do that without move more away from it with our next service. But I guess my only kind of and this should be the case anyway. My only kind of ask is that we work very closely with the business areas, and it's done as a joint venture, and together they kind of develop the product. So I'd say almost in total autonomy, actually, working with very closely with the business.
I mean, I'll come and ask Jane's perception in a minute, because she's working in a team and be able to say that. I mean, obviously, I'm like a little bit of a control freak, Jack Lindsay, you'll remember this. So I like to put my hand on the tiller occasionally. Well, more than occasionally, and kind of say, wow, why? So there is, it's about the things that I care passionately about, and making sure that we're all kind of aligned around that vision. So sometimes there's a little bit of correction going on there, but we do try and let those teams go. But how does it feel like from your area, Jane, kind of in the development teams?
Yeah, I think because we've got the structure in place, it does allow for feedback to go to the right people and go on the right backlog and then be reviewed by the right teams. Whereas historically, maybe that wasn't an opportunity for anyone to be able to feedback, or it went into such a large pot that it maybe never happened. So the improvements are probably feeding in just as we are growing and developing our products, and that's obviously where the customer then sees the benefits of the change, and more frequent changes rather than waiting 12 months for a massive amount of change to all to be deployed all at once.
I mean, to get to that point, though, you do need sort of transformation building blocks in place, and I know from my experience from doing the new registration services that there was a slight bit of tension from our business colleagues who wanted the product to be absolutely brilliant and excellent before it went in, and kind of me saying, look, let's just get it in. We've got the teams around that can then do it. Trust us, we will go and then improve, and we'll do all of the things that you want. And there was a little bit of skepticism, people's experience from previous change programs where they might have felt that something. So you actually have to do that and then live that and then show, actually, now you listen to me and we've got a product in and it's okay. We are now doing the things that are really important to you in the business, not the things that we think might be important. So just to get to that place. But yeah, as Jane says, actually giving the product teams the ability to just listen to their stakeholders and what's important to them.
Yeah, particularly once you can start getting changes quickly and afterwards, as Jane was saying, you can iterate on it. Okay, let's move on to then another question. Thanks for those great answers. So Brigid, one for you, and then perhaps Deborah can also talk about HMPO. So what lessons did you each take from your previous kind of digital transformation? So Brigid from HMRC and Deborah from the Passport Office, and that you then tried to apply at Ofsted. What worked, what didn't work?
And I think, I've been gone from HMRC a while, so it's probably no longer the organisation it was when I was there, and things move on. But I think for the thing that I came into Ofsted and really was keen on making sure happened was I didn't want to create two organisations in digital data and technology. And my experience, and I think it was probably common in a lot of organisations right in the early days, that you had your new digital team and then you kind of had a technology team over there, yeah, and you know, this bit of the kind of fight at the interface and bringing lots of new people in on and digital and, you know, all of that. I wanted it to be one team, and I'm sure HMRC have got over that, and you know, they had a kind of like big stuff to do with their insourcing and stuff, but I didn't want that to happen, and that was really drove some of the kind of consultation on the operating model and making sure that people could, you know, we weren't doing any compulsory moves, etc. So yes, it's hard though. It is really hard. All that people stuff is not easy, and you just have to kind of keep going back and working very hard at it. So that was my learning point. Deborah.
Thanks. How about you, Deborah?
Yeah, I think perhaps not taking on too much. I mean, there was in HMPO, we had to do a lot, and we did everything all at the same time, including kind of a big change in target operating model. So the way the teams were structured kind of across the Passport Office. So and there was a bit of temptation, I think, with this to kind of go, oh, should we do full transformation when we looked at application data modernisation, but actually kind of taking that kind of not quite as ambitious kind of approach. Yeah, I think it certainly was one of my learnings, and actually I think that's showing that was the right thing to do, because there's a lot of other stuff going on as well, and actually to try and do kind of full transformation and operating model kind of in its entirety, yeah, would have been extremely challenging. And I think the other thing that I've taken from Passport Office and looking at when we're kind of starting to introduce, and it's within Ofsted, is business change. Actually, we didn't have the business change profession within Ofsted, and it worked very well in Passport Office. So we're starting to kind of establish that now within Ofsted. We're only a very small team, so we're smaller than Passports, but actually it's helping kind of with that conduit between kind of the business teams and the internal comms teams, and it's kind of helping pull things together and look at that kind of change landscape, and helping us kind of think about you know, talking about user research. We can't try not to ask it the same person, the same team for user research for every single thing that we're doing. So they're kind of helping us kind of balance some of that kind of need and some of that request. So I think that's helped working quite well.
I mean, if I could come back, because I kind of did a slight negative, and I would take a positive from HMRC, was that approach to customer service and how closely digital was aligned to customer service offering, and the kind of leadership from the Customer Service Director General at that time in HMRC to align that. And digital was seen as the response to customer service challenges. So what we've tried to do in the team is really talk about the customer a lot. So that's why we've got working with customers modules and the CSAT, etc. So that was a really powerful learning from HMRC to bring into Ofsted, and in particular kind of delivering early customer value, because that just makes everybody feel great. Yeah,
it does. I can very much relate to all those stories. Okay, let's move on then. Thank you both. A question from Sam McGregor. Did the organisation understand the value that the design function would offer in solving problems? Was there any kind of design function before the digital kind of strategy?
That we had an architecture function, so I did have to do quite a lot of convincing to say, actually, let's bring architecture together with user research, and you know, just actually bring all of that into kind of one place. That was seen as a bit unusual. I know it isn't, but it was seen at that time. So yes, it did take a little bit of convincing to do that, but there was a really kind of strong kind of efficiency and cash drive around it as well. In Ofsted has previously spent a lot of money on discovery work. yeah, externally, you know, and then on, I mean, well spent, because didn't go then and do things that would have been a bit slightly the wrong, you know, got to a good place, but it was very expensive in terms of in our overall budget. So the kind of case for change was not only about the quality and having control over that, etc., but also the ability for us to run and bring all of that in-house, discovery and alpha work as a start, even if we weren't mature enough to bring all of beta work in. So that was the kind of real selling point, that we had our, you know, our own kind of ability to manage that, and we were able to show those savings, efficiency savings, and that productivity really early on.
Thank you, that's great. Deborah or Jane, anything you want to add to that?
Jane, do you want to go first if there's anything?
Yeah, I was just going to, you know, thinking about where that design team sit in that structure. Historically, the architectural team sat in the technology division, so it really wouldn't have made sense to have, you know, part of a new portfolio start on one side and then switch back and forth. So yeah, the idea that it's being designed and architected, you know, from the same family in a way, and then progressing through to development does make sense when you look at it from a slightly different angle maybe than how we've done it before.
And I think the only thing I was going to add was that actually now their services are in demand, so they get asked quite a lot to go and kind of work with some of our central teams. So, for example, to look around, you know, should we be looking at for a new intranet, for example, and working with some of our data and insight colleagues around what we can do, kind of with some of our reporting needs, kind of in the data and insight team. So, yeah, they get asked to support with quite a lot of things. So I think that's kind of proof that they're now very much valued.
Oh, that's great. That's great to hear. Yeah, a question from Frank. Thanks for sharing your experience. How have you managed the knowledge transfer from existing vendors? You talked about there being a number of existing vendors that start to internal teams, and I guess you described about discoveries being one of such transfer. Did you have to rebuild knowledge from scratch at all?
Yeah, so I mean, we have worked with some really good partners, and so and in some ways, some of the contracts that we had around discovery and alpha work did enable, you know, particularly our product people to learn from the best what good looks like. I will say we haven't always made the best use of our previous work. You know, there is a little bit of a tendency for people to want to start, and that it's something that we just need to keep working on. We have got did really well in terms of establishing libraries of user research and stuff that we found out in, so that kind of disciplines there. I think in terms of our big legacy estate, we're well served by a decision that was made quite a few years ago by our technology people that wanted to get into doing some development. It was mainly configuration, but expanded on from that. So we had a small development team that did some development in-house, while our we relied on other changes from an external vendor, and through doing that, I've built up a tremendous amount of knowledge. You know, existing systems, processes. You know, lots of you know, how to do kind of design with our stakeholders. So that was a really good strategy that we're now leveraging as those teams transition and we're managing in a new way. But it is. I'm not sure we're absolutely there with kind of knowledge management and transfer, and I think that's a kind of common thing that we just need to keep an eye on.
Just Jane, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think systems are changing all the time. People are changing. The stakeholders are asking for new things all the time. Whilst you can learn from maybe, you know, what's happened in the past. there's so many other things that are changing around us that it might not be relevant anymore. So I think keeping, you know, ideas fresh from the people that maybe we've recruited new, or that have transferred from other teams. Sometimes those ideas maybe weren't, didn't have a platform to share them in the past, and now they do, and they've got a voice. So I think learning from historical is great, and other vendors that may be external, but we have some great ideas from within the teams, and being able to leverage those the right way. You know, it's lessons learned in many different ways combining to move forward.
And we have established communities of practice, and actually what we have done is it's not just internal staff, it's our suppliers are involved in those, and our contractors, and so there's kind of knowledge transfer in that respect too.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. We'll just take one last question, which is on communities of practice. So can you talk us, can you provide a story about how communities of practice have helped in the transition of existing staff into the new digital world at Ofsted?
Can I give that to you, to Deborah?
Yeah, so kind of similar to kind of all the government departments actually. So we've established communities of practice, we've established an overarching project delivery community of practice as our umbrella, and then we've looked at kind of communities of practice for each of the disciplines, so product managers, delivery management, user research, and actually we open it up to the whole of Ofsted, because we've not just got project managers or business analysts or delivery managers in kind of digital change. We've got those professions kind of across Ofsted. So as I said, a lot of our policy driven changes are managed by a policy program manager, and we just are one strand of that, delivering the technology. Sometimes we do most of it, but we do have project managers and delivery managers and product managers actually, and data and insight teams have product managers too. So it isn't just within digital change. So we've developed these communities of practice. We also join all the cross-government groups. We just get as much information and knowledge as we can from kind of across government. We align to the DDAT frameworks. We work very closely with GDS. We try and get people in to talk to us in those communities of practice. We use the project delivery capability framework too. So we try and kind of align to kind of all the standards that kind of government has set, and we try and bring those kind of back through the practices and communities. And we actually, the communities drive what they want to learn. So we kind of meet monthly, weekly, whatever that community wants to do, and they will say what they want to kind of focus that discussion and that community on, as I think is the kind of the same approach to a lot of the community practices across government.
I mean, for me, the example is that you know, we have been able to kind of take in relatively new people, or new people in role, or newly promoted, because building a big operating model like that, it means that there's quite a lot of churn, and actually kind of learn from previous kind of examples of that. I mean, and a question that I asked today at a board for one of our delivery managers was, is this as hard as it was last time, you know, that we both worked on this, or have we kind of learned through that this is always going to be tricky, or that's the person that you go to when you want to do X, Y, and Z. And that's that real value, is that you get a better productivity, you get least mistakes. At the same time, you know, giving people permission that, you know, it's not cookie cutter. You don't always have to do everything exactly the same way. It's a different set of problems. But just that kind of having that support from someone that's done a very difficult deployment on some really old technology in the past, or have joined up something new over here, and being able to share that.
Great, thank you. Anything you want to add, Jane, before we wrap up?
No, I think I've both been covered, yeah.
Great, thank you everyone so much for their questions, and a super big thank you to Brigid, Deborah and Jane for sharing their expertise with us today. Education is massively important, and it's really great to understand and learn about, you know, the kind of improvements that you know, you're helping Ofsted deliver, that's going to have kind of really wide benefits to our society. So thank you again for giving up your evenings to chat to us. The next expert talks online is in 2 weeks' time, and Dave Brown, who's a founding angel investor in Pinterest, and Lisa Copland, head of product design at Equal Experts, will be sharing their lessons in innovation. And the discussion will provide an intimate look at the lessons from Pinterest success and look at how companies can stay relevant through innovation. And you can sign up for that talk now at the Equal Experts site. So thank you again, Brigid, Deborah and Jane. I hope you all have a good rest of your day wherever you are, and see you next time on Equal Experts Talks Online.
Thank
Thanks,
you very
folks.
much.